So the last speaker, Elinor, what did you mean by asset lock?
Okay, asset lock is something which is available specifically to community benefit societies. It's a structure protected by the FCA, which means that the properties and assets which are owned by the organisation, in the event that the society should fail, once debts have been paid off, then any residual monies or assets can only be passed on to a like-minded organisation, so they can never be speculatively sold off. So nobody could dissolve the society in order to make a profit from the assets that you've developed.
Next, this lady over here.
I wanted to ask Coop and Urbed, is there any objective way to assess when a building when it's better to demolish and rebuild and when it's better to retrofit, or is that just completely subjective?
I wouldn't say. Did everyone hear the question?
I wouldn't say it's completely subjective, but as has kind of been hinted at in some of the other sessions, it's not a totally technical assessment either, because you could just do a carbon analysis, and sometimes it might be marginal in terms of whether to demolish or refurbish. But what I would say in a lot of cases, in the Carbon Coop project, we were dealing with people who stayed living in their houses while the work was done. And there are social and economic benefits to that. If you demolish and rebuild, there's a whole load of other costs that don't necessarily get taken into account. And then when you scale it up to, say, Granby or Anfield, there's a massive social cost to what happens to a neighbourhood if you decide to demolish it and start again. So you can do that assessment, but there are other things in play than a purely technical judgment.
Can I add something to that very briefly, which is that it also doesn't take into account the carbon impact of the building materials to rebuild. As I found early on, that an architect's concept of what life cycle for materials starts from when all the materials arrive on site, doesn't take into account what you're throwing away by demolishing the building and sending it to landfill. So the impact, the total impact of knocking down and rebuilding will be much, much higher than just the impact of the improvements in the building that you replace it with.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add? Yes.
Two quick questions, one for Marianne and Jonathan, which is, maybe you cover this, but I missed it. What's the sort of payback period for retrofitting? And the other one's for Elinor, which is, how did you avoid having to take people off the housing register? Was it because you were below the limit, the level at which you have to do a certain percentage of affordable?
The concept of payback period is quite a contended one, because it depends the order in which you actually apply measures in terms of the percentage of carbon saved and money saved and that sort of thing. What we tend to do is, when we do assessments, we give an impact assessment to whether a particular measure will save you a lot of money in relation to its cost, or whether it'll be more in terms of comfort and that sort of thing. So, but Marianne's a bit more.
I think the other thing I'd say is that simple payback is it's not necessarily the best tool to look at this with. People say that maybe net present value or something like that, which is a bit more complicated and takes into account discounting terms and things, is probably slightly better. But also at the same time, people don't expect their new bathroom to pay back necessarily in simple terms. They might expect it to add a little bit to the house value, but you don't really know that until you sell your house. And same with kitchens and things. So the view of a lot of people in that pilot program, a lot of Carbon Coop members, is they want to be seen to be they want to do the right kind of thing, and they don't want to feel like they're throwing money away. But if things are generally heading in the right direction and they're getting other benefits from it, like a warmer home, then they're less bothered about the actual, simple payback. If I do this external wall insulation and it'll pay for itself in 40 years, I'm not going to do it. But if it pays for itself in 35, I will. I don't think that's how people think about it.
On the housing register side of it, there's several different factors. This particular one, as our first project, is only 6 units. So being below 10 units, we didn't have to provide a mandatory affordable housing element, although everything, actually all of the units come out as below the what would be the affordable housing level ceiling anyway, even if we were doing that. In terms of not having to take people off the housing list, that's currently is to do with whether you take government grant money has the major impact on whether you're compelled to take so many people from the list. Though because we're a community benefit society with specific aims of housing people in housing need, we're currently exploring whether that will actually apply to us when we get to onto a bigger project, because it may be that because we are fulfilling the aims of the organisation and we remain as landlords, as a landlord organisation providing affordable housing, that it may not actually apply to us at all. And that's our hope.
Yes, over here.
I might have missed it, but I don't think you mentioned air tightness. In your £40,000, do you get to a level of air tightness that you can put in heat recovery systems?
Not in terms of energy payback. I mean, you could. The issue that we were what we were trying to do was make a project that was doable in terms of large-scale rollout. So it wasn't to Passive House standard. It wasn't in terms of stripping everything back to brick and making everything completely airtight. As you know, it would be lovely to be able to do that, but with the budget that we had, the time that we had, not possible. We got down to, I think, about 5-ish, between 5 and 10 in terms of airtightness, which is horrifically kind of the limit for current new build housing as well. That's where a lot of that is ending up. So, you know, it's as good as current new build, which is still not great. But I think, again, there are other reasons for doing MVHR that might be to do with mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. This is so where you have the whole of the air to the house supplied through a mechanical system that passes incoming air through a heat exchanger with outgoing air, so you're recovering some of the heat from the outgoing air. If you've got particular problems with high levels of humidity, it might help a bit. If you've got issues with comfort, it might help a bit. But in terms of financial energy sense, no, we didn't get quite that far.
Any other questions?
I wondered whether, with the retrofitting, the design of the house, the style of building that you're working on, would impact the way that you would approach the retrofit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's also lots of things in. So, for instance, one of our homes was in a conservation area, so that and all the homes that we did, we externally insulated at the back and sides, and internally insulated at the front, so the visual appearance was maintained. But in simple energy terms, the most easiest thing to insulate is a box, like literally a box. Yeah. And the more you complicate from there, the more you complicate the junctions where insulation meets other insulation, and you know, all the other things.
Yeah, I think it would change your approach. I think the other thing that changes your approach sometimes is the individuals in the house as well, and in terms of what their priorities are. Because if you don't mind being freezing cold and you're really bothered about saving carbon, then you just turn your heating down and put some PVs on your roof, and you're doing quite a lot of good in carbon terms potentially. But actually it's about more than that, and it's about getting the right balance for the individual as well. And there are commonalities between people, but everyone, it's a house, it is a proper socio-technical issue, so it's about the householders and the house itself. And then when you get into mechanical systems as well, that's the whole other level of complexity, where you get more variation in terms of how they perform because they're more affected by how people use them. So it's the usability of systems becomes really important as well.
Yeah, I guess what I think was interesting was the long-term effects of some of the retrofitting that happened. I live in East London, and there's some really wonderful social housing that's built around there, beautiful brickwork, and it really adds to the character of the area, and for me sort of sets up a kind of community in that respect. And I obviously appreciate the need for retrofitting buildings, but I saw a lot of these houses getting kind of whitewashed, and they've got this wonderful, they're all good, I'm sure they'll be energy efficient, and now they're very white and crisp and clean. And then I sort of think, well, in 5 years' time, are they going to be dirty? You know, they're going to be stained and dirty, and suddenly the sort of people's relationship changes with it. They're viewed as dirty buildings. I mean, I'm sort of prophesying, but
partly in the quality of the detailing as well. If you get the detailing right, that should be less of
But
an
there's
issue.
a deeper issue because there's aesthetic concerns which are real, yeah, and also can be mediated. But there's also which is the stuff that Britt's talking about in terms of when we as communities make an investment in the fabric of our homes, we're actually adding not just to our homes, but to the fabric of our communities and our interactions with those communities. And in exploring this, and Marianne's kind of typified to an extreme an idea where you would go to an extreme to just for carbon saving, and that's not what we're about. We're investing in homes. But when you do that, you have all sorts of added benefits and effects, and there is a sort of a philosophical view about investing in the quality of our life and the quality of our interactions. And for me, that's the stuff that Homebaked are doing, is the bit in between just simply looking at these as individual homes,
Yeah, and sitting around, I guess what has to happen for these processes is for people to change the narrative and to sit around a table and negotiate how they want to live and what kind of community they want to build. And that is, it's a negotiation, and we need to create, processes and places where this negotiation takes place, to actually, I think, to implement the concepts or ideas that are great, but only in the way that we implement them and how we negotiate that implementation will we be able to actually carry them together and make them work. So a new way of thinking about local economy, for example, is only possible if people negotiate how to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, question on the front row.
For Homebaked, you had mentioned that the local council had taken you off of the demarcation area. So they've obviously seen the value in what you've done, but are they now trying to facilitate dialogue between your own organization and the planners, or have they kind of just let you be and they're not necessarily interested in your perspective as regard to the greater neighborhood?
No, there's a whole, the relationship to the council has changed. I think they see a value to a certain degree. We are now for the first time, so there's been I think 5 different master plans over the time, or maybe even more. We're on this one, actually, as a site, and also as a way of working, as a possibility. So I think there is a beginning, because the same negotiation doesn't only happen between people that live in that community, it also has to happen between the people in the community and the officials, because we need to start thinking in a different way about sustainability, I guess. And I guess for a council it starts to make sense when they go, oh, maybe actually that makes our investment more long-term affordable and more long-term sustainable, more than anything, as a high street, but that is in an area where we are in the north. We don't have massive investors coming in, so there's a bit of time. We have the gap of time to think about this, and not somebody's going to snap it up like here any other second, because nobody wants to open a shop at the moment. I'm sure they will soon, but by then we're hoping that we have enough of that way of thinking in.
Just a really quick comment, kind of following up from that you said that now people are moving into the area because of Homebaked, and obviously that's a problem in terms of house prices going up. For all these years, the council have been trying to make house prices go up, and it was only you who managed to successfully do that.
And we've become complicit.
But maybe not.
But also proving that this is the kind of approach that actually works for an area, rather than
And I'm also
schemes.
one person speaking here, right? I have a very particular political idea. Not everybody in Homebaked is like that, right? Many people in Homebaked are stakeholders within a neighborhood development. They own houses, and they're very happy that their house prices are going up because they live in a system where that is helpful to them, and blooming deserve that to happen to them for once, right? So this is a really complex discussion to have. I come from Germany. I think, you know, renting is fantastic. But just because, so we, you know, but we sit around the table and we discuss this. And then people go, oh, yeah, and, you know, we think about my children, always an interesting argument.
And it's not just about people moving in, it's people not leaving, because that is an issue, it has been an issue in Liverpool and different parts of the north, people, you know, leaving an area.
Well, I think, yeah. But in terms of making it work, because Granby's very similar, where you've got owner-occupiers who've held on through fairly horrific circumstances for a long time, and if they end up, their houses go up in value a bit, I do not begrudge that at all. But what they also want to protect against is, the area we're looking at is a mile and a half from the city centre, close to some really lovely parks. It's ripe for gentrification. And that was one of the reasons why when we found the MHOS model, we thought this is perfect because it gives us some security, but it also means that we're not going to make a speculative profit and these houses do remain affordable, and other people like us in 10 years, 20 years' time will still be able to afford to live in this area because it's fab and they should be able to.
Any other comments? No? It's time to break for lunch, I think. Is that right? Yeah. Thank you to all of the panellists again. That was a really fruitful discussion.